The twin suns of Erides Prime had barely crested the horizon when Thomas Brennan heard the knocking. It wasn't the polite rap of a neighbor or the authoritative bang of a coalition inspector. It was desperate, frantic even, the sound of small fists hammering against reinforced metal with the kind of urgency that made his chest tighten before he'd even left his bed. Thomas sat up slowly, his joints protesting. 53 years of farming on a frontier world had carved lines into his face and stiffness into his bones. The empty side of the bed beside him was cold, as it had been for the past 2 years since Sarah passed. He didn't look at it anymore. Looking only made the mornings harder. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. All right, he muttered, pulling on his work pants and a faded shirt that had seen better decades. His bare feet hit the cool metal floor of the prefab farmhouse, a standard-issue dwelling for human colonists willing to work the outer rim territories. It wasn't much, but it was his. He made his way through the narrow hallway, past the kitchen, where breakfast dishes from 3 days ago still sat in the sonic cleaner, past the living room with its worn couch and the bookshelf Sarah had insisted they bring from Earth. The knocking had stopped, but he could hear something else now, a small hitching sound crying. Thomas's hand hesitated on the door panel. Out here, 300 miles from the nearest settlement, visitors were rare, friendly visitors even rarer. The outer rim was a place for people running from something or too stubborn to quit what everyone else had abandoned. He was the latter. He pressed the release, and the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. A child stood on his doorstep. Thomas blinked, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The child was small, maybe 8 or 9 in human years, though age was hard to gauge with alien species. Their skin was a pale lavender, almost translucent in the early morning light, with darker purple patterns that swirled across their arms and face like watercolor paintings. Large liquid eyes, completely black except for flecks of silver that caught the dawn, stared up at him with a desperation that hit him like a physical blow. Varosi. He recognized the species from the trader caravans that occasionally passed through the region. Peaceful people, known for their empathic abilities and their near extinction after the Varosi Wars 3 centuries ago. There were maybe a few million left in the entire galaxy. And one of them was standing on his porch, covered in dust and what looked like dried blood. "Please," the child said in heavily accented but understandable standard galactic. Their voice was high and strained, breaking on the single word. "Please, they hurt my guardian. She's dying, please." Thomas felt his heart lurch. "Who's dying? Where?" The child turned and pointed toward the eastern fields, where Thomas's crops of Terran wheat met the wild grasslands that stretched for hundreds of miles. "There, in the rocks. She protected me, but they hurt her. She's bleeding so much. Please, please help her." Thomas grabbed his boots from beside the door, shoving his feet into them without bothering to tie the laces. "How far?" "Not far. I ran fast." The child's eyes welled with tears again. "But she's so hurt. They shot her and stabbed her and she still fought them all. She killed them, but now she won't wake up right. Please." He grabbed his field medkit from the wall mount, a basic kit with coagulants, synthetic skin, and antibiotics designed for human physiology, but adaptable in emergencies. It probably wouldn't be enough for whatever this was, but it was all he had. His rifle hung beside the kit. He hesitated only a moment before taking it too. "Show me," he said. The child took off running, their small legs pumping with surprising speed. Thomas followed, his longer stride keeping pace despite the rough terrain. They cut through his wheat field, he'd apologized to the plants later, and into the rocky outcropping that marked the boundary of his property. The smell hit him first. Blood, sharp and metallic, mixed with something else. Sulfur and ozone, like a lightning strike. Then he saw the bodies. 3 of them, scattered across the rocks like broken dolls. They wore mismatched armor, the kind bounty hunters and mercenaries cobbled together from a dozen different sources. One was a krell, its insectoid carapace cracked open. Another was human, or had been. Thomas forced himself not to look too closely. The third was something he didn't recognize, all tentacles and too many teeth, now a charred mass. And beyond them, slumped against a boulder with one massive wing bent at an unnatural angle, was the Guardian. Thomas stopped dead. He'd seen pictures of draconians before. Everyone in the galaxy had. They were the apex species of the Draconith Empire, one of the 3 great powers that divided the known universe. Warriors without peer, each one worth 100 soldiers of any other species. They stood 8 feet tall with scales like armor plating, wings that could carry them across continents, and claws that could tear through starship hulls. This one was dying. She was massive, even hunched and broken as she was. Crimson scales covered her body, darker along her spine and lighter on her chest, but so much of that chest was now stained with blood, her own blood, that it was hard to tell where the scales ended and the wounds began. One wing hung useless, the membrane torn through in 3 places. Her left arm was clutched against her side, and Thomas could see the white of bone through a gash that ran from her shoulder to her elbow. But it was her eyes that held him frozen. They were gold, bright as sunlight, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel like prey. Even dying, even broken, she radiated a predator's awareness. Her lips pulled back from teeth the size of his fingers, each one sharp enough to tear flesh from bone. "Stay back," she rasped in standard galactic, her voice like gravel sliding down a metal chute. "I will not let you take her." "Thomas!" The child, Liz, he needed to stop thinking of them as just the child, rushed past him and threw their small arms around the draconian's uninjured arm. "I brought help, like you said. I found the human and he came." The golden eyes shifted to the child, and something in that fierce gaze softened. "Liz, I told you. Run. Keep running. Don't come back. I won't leave you." Liz's voice cracked. "You saved me from them. You can't die. You can't." Thomas forced his legs to move. He approached slowly, hands visible, the medkit held out in front of him. "Ma'am, my name is Thomas Brennan. I'm a farmer. I have medical supplies. Not much, but something. Will you let me help?" The draconian's eyes narrowed. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Because you're hurt. I am Draconith. You are human. We are not allies." "You're bleeding to death on my property," Thomas said, kneeling about 10 feet away. Close enough to talk, far enough not to seem threatening. "And that child there is terrified. Those seem like good enough reasons to me. Humans do not help freely. What do you want? Credits, information, leverage?" Thomas set the medkit down and held up his empty hands. "I want to stop a child from watching someone they care about die. I've seen that look before, ma'am. Watched it on my own son's face when we couldn't save his mother. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." Something flickered in those golden eyes. Pain, yes, but something else. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. "You would risk yourself for sentiment?" "I'd risk myself to do what's right," Thomas said quietly. "Now, are you going to let me try to patch you up, or are we going to sit here arguing philosophy while you bleed out?" The draconian studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "If you harm Liz, I won't. I will use my last breath to tear you apart." "Understood." Thomas moved forward, medkit in hand. Up close, the damage was even worse than he'd thought. The gash on her arm was deep, cutting through scale and muscle down to bone. But it wasn't the worst injury. That honor went to the wound in her side, just below her ribs. Something had punctured clean through. A blade, maybe, or a projectile spike. He could see the exit wound on her back, the edges blackened and cauterized. "This is going to hurt," he said, pulling out a coagulant pack. "I am Draconith," she said through gritted teeth. "I do not fear pain. Brave and stubborn." Lovely combination. He tore open the pack and pressed it against the worst of the bleeding. The chemical reaction was immediate, a hissing sound as the foam expanded, filling the wound and hardening into a temporary seal. The draconian's entire body went rigid. A low rumbling sound emerged from her chest, somewhere between a growl and a groan. I know," Thomas murmured, working quickly. "Just breathe. You're doing fine. I do not need comfort from a human." "Sure you don't." He moved to the arm, applying synthetic skin to the worst of the lacerations. His hands were steady, despite the absurdity of the situation. 2 years ago, he'd been doing this same work on injured livestock and the occasional farmhand who got careless with equipment. Now he was patching up an 8-foot-tall dragon warrior, while bounty hunter corpses cooled 20 feet away. Sarah would have laughed herself sick. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep her conscious. "Serath." "Well, Serath, I'm almost done. You've lost a lot of blood, though. I don't suppose draconians and humans have compatible blood types?" "No, didn't think so." He finished with the synthetic skin and sat back on his heels. "The coagulant will hold for now, but you need real medical attention. There's a clinic in New Coventry about 300 miles west. I've got a ground transport that can make the trip in 6 hours. "No." Serath's voice was firm, despite her weakness. "No officials. No coalition, no empire." Thomas frowned. "You need a doctor. I need time. They will send more hunters." They always send more. She looked at Liz, and her expression cracked just slightly. I need to keep her safe. Who's they? Does it matter? Serath's eyes closed. Hunters are hunters. Credits drive them all. Someone wants Liz dead. Someone wants me dead. As long as we live, they will come. Thomas looked at the child, Liz, who had wrapped their arms around Serath's uninjured side and was crying silently into the crimson scales. He thought about his farm, his quiet life, the crops that needed harvesting in 2 weeks. He thought about the smart thing to do, which was to load Serath into his transport, drop her at the clinic, and let someone else handle whatever mess this was. He thought about his son's face the day Sarah died. All right, he said. No clinic. But we're not staying out here, can you walk? Serath opened one eye. I am Draconith, I can... She tried to stand and immediately collapsed. Thomas caught her, or tried to. It was like trying to catch a falling building. They both went down in a tangle of limbs and scales. Okay, Thomas wheezed from underneath approximately half a ton of injured dragon warrior. New plan. Liz, I need you to run back to my house. In the storage shed behind the main building, there's a hover cart. Red, about this big. He held his hands apart to indicate the size. Can you find it and bring it here? Liz nodded and took off running. Thomas managed to extricate himself from beneath Serath. You're heavier than you look. Scales are dense, she mumbled, and I am mostly muscle. Fantastic. He checked her wounds again. The coagulant was holding, but her breathing was shallow. Shock, probably, combined with blood loss. Stay with me, Serath. Don't you dare die on me now. Why? Her eyes had closed again. Why do you care? Because that little girl cares about you, Thomas said, and because nobody should die alone in the dirt if there's another option. Sentimental. Fool. Yeah, I get that a lot. Serath was quiet for a moment. Then so softly he almost missed it. Thank you. Thomas looked down at the massive draconian warrior, this creature who could have killed him with one hand, even in her weakened state. This member of a species that had warred with humanity for decades before the current cold peace. She looked small somehow, despite her size. Vulnerable. Don't thank me yet, he said. Getting you back to the house is going to be the easy part. What is the hard part? Thomas looked at the dead bounty hunters, then at the horizon where more could be coming from. Everything that comes after. Liz returned 15 minutes later with the hover cart, her face flushed and her breathing heavy. Together, Thomas and the child managed to roll Serath onto the cart, a process that involved a lot of groaning from Serath and more than one muttered curse in what Thomas assumed was the Draconith language. Hold on, he told her, engaging the hover field. The cart lifted 2 feet off the ground and Thomas began the slow journey back to his farmhouse. The suns were fully up now, painting the wheat fields in shades of gold and amber. It would have been beautiful, Thomas thought, if he weren't hauling a dying alien warrior and her ward to his home while trying to figure out how he'd gotten himself into this mess. Behind them, the bodies of the bounty hunters lay still and cooling. Above them, somewhere in the morning sky, ships might already be turning toward Erides Prime. Hunters were coming, Serath had said. They always sent more. Thomas tightened his grip on the hovercart's controls and kept walking. The smart thing would have been to turn around, to let someone else handle this, to go back to his quiet, lonely life and his crops and his memories. But Thomas Brennan had stopped doing the smart thing the day he'd signed up to colonize a frontier world, and he'd be damned if he started again now. We're going to be okay, he told Liz, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince the child or himself. Everything's going to be okay. Liz looked up at him with those liquid, silver-flecked eyes and said nothing, but their small hand found his, and they held on tight. Together, they walked toward the farmhouse as the twin suns climbed higher in the alien sky. Getting Serath into the house proved to be an exercise in physics, determination, and what Thomas's father would have called stubborn stupidity. The draconian was conscious, but weak, and even with the hovercart doing most of the lifting, maneuvering 8 feet and half a ton of scaled muscle through a doorway designed for humans required creativity and several broken doorframe sensors. Left, Thomas grunted, his shoulder braced against Serath's side. No, your left. My right. Just there. They collapsed through the doorway in a heap. Thomas's back screamed in protest, and Serath made a sound that was either a groan of pain or a growl of frustration, possibly both. I apologize, Serath said through gritted teeth, for the indignity of this situation. You're bleeding on my floor, Thomas replied, pushing himself to his feet. We're past worrying about dignity. He looked around his small living space, calculating. The couch wouldn't hold her. The bed was too narrow. "Liz, help me move this table." The child immediately grabbed one end of Thomas's dining table, a sturdy piece he'd built himself from local timber, and together they shoved it against the wall. Thomas grabbed every blanket and cushion he owned and made a makeshift pallet on the floor. "This will have to do," he said, helping Serath onto it. She sprawled across the blankets, her wing tucked awkwardly against her body, her breathing labored. "Liz, there's water in the kitchen. Blue pitcher, can you bring it?" The child scurried off, and Thomas knelt beside Serath to check her wounds. The coagulant foam had held, but already he could see dark fluid seeping around the edges of the worst injury. Not good. "I need to know what I'm working with," he said quietly. "Draconian physiology. What can kill you?" Serath's eyes opened to slits of gold. The list of what cannot would be shorter. "I'm serious." She studied him for a long moment. "Blood loss, organ failure, infection, the same things that kill any creature." She paused. "Our healing factor is significant, but it requires energy, calories, and time." "How much time? For wounds like these?" She glanced at her ruined wing, her shredded arm. "Days, maybe a week, if I am not disturbed, if I can feed." Thomas's mind raced. Days meant the hunters Serath had warned about would definitely come. A week meant they'd have time to organize, to bring reinforcements, to siege his farm if necessary. But leaving her here, vulnerable, wasn't an option. Neither was turning her over to authorities. Something in the way she'd said, "No coalition, no empire," told him that would be a death sentence of a different kind. Liz returned with the water pitcher and 3 cups. Thomas poured one for Serath, helping her sit up enough to drink. She drained it in seconds. "More," she said. He refilled it twice more before she waved it away. Color was beginning to return to her scales. Subtle, but there. "Food?" he asked. "Meat, raw, if possible. Cooked if necessary. Large quantities." Thomas went to his cold storage unit and pulled out everything he had. 2 sides of synthetic beef, a haunch of local game he'd traded for last month, and a string of protein bars that technically qualified as meat-adjacent. He brought it all to Serath. She looked at the offering, then at him. "This is your food supply. I'll manage. The hunting season does not begin for another month on this world. I researched before we crashed here. You are giving me stores that must last you through the lean time." "Are you arguing with me about accepting help?" Thomas asked mildly. "Because I seem to remember doing the same thing about an hour ago, and you called me sentimental." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Serath's scaled face. "Touché." She reached for the game haunch and tore into it with teeth that made his hunting knife look like a toy. Within minutes, she'd consumed half his meat supply. Thomas watched her eat and tried not to calculate how quickly his remaining supplies would deplete. It didn't matter. He'd made his choice. Liz had curled up in one of Thomas's armchairs, exhaustion finally overtaking the child. Their lavender skin looked almost grey in the indoor light, and the swirling patterns on their arms had faded to dull purple lines. "The child needs rest," Serath said, following his gaze. "Varossi require more sleep than most species. Their empathic abilities drain them." "Empathic?" They feel the emotions of those around them. It is what made them so valuable during the wars, and so vulnerable after. Serath's expression darkened. An entire species nearly destroyed because others wanted to weaponize their gifts. Thomas found a spare blanket and draped it over Liz. The child didn't wake, but a small hand clutched at the fabric. "You said someone wants them dead. Why?" "That," Serath said carefully, "is a complicated question. I've got time." Serath was quiet for so long that Thomas thought she might refuse to answer. Then, "What do you know of the Varossi Wars?" "Not much. They happened before I was born. I know the Varossi had some kind of empire and it fell. I know there aren't many of them left. 300 years ago, the Varossi ascendancy controlled 40 systems. They were philosophers, diplomats, artists. Their empathic abilities made them natural mediators. They ended conflicts with words rather than weapons." Serath's claws flexed against the floor. Then the Krell Collective discovered that Varossi empaths could be conditioned to serve as living weapons, forced to project fear, despair, madness into enemy populations. Thomas felt his stomach turn. "That's monstrous." "Yes." Serath's voice was flat. "The Draconith Empire and the Coalition of Free Worlds went to war with the Krell to stop it. We won. But by then, 40 Varossi systems had been reduced to 4. Billions dead. The survivors scattered across the galaxy, hiding their children, changing their names, trying to disappear into the noise of 100 other species. And Liz? Liss is one of perhaps 10,000 Varossi children left alive, and Liss, Serath trailed off, her golden eyes fixed on the sleeping child. Liss is special. Special how? Liss is the grandchild of the last Varossi queen, the last direct heir to a dynasty that ruled for 2,000 years before the Krell tore it all down. Thomas sank into his remaining chair. Oh, indeed. Serath's wing rustled and she winced. There are factions within the galaxy that want to restore the Varossi to power, others that want to ensure they can never rise again, still others that see Liss as a symbol to be captured, controlled, or eliminated. The child is worth more as a corpse to some than as a living heir to others. And you? I was Liss's guardian, assigned by, she hesitated, by someone who owed a debt to the Varossi people. I was to keep Liss safe until they reached maturity, old enough to choose their own path, old enough to decide whether to reclaim their heritage or live in peace as someone else. Was? Serath's expression closed. I failed. The hunters found us. They will find us again, and next time they'll have to go through me too, Thomas said. Serath's eyes snapped to him. You do not understand what you are offering. I understand that child over there is terrified. I understand you're hurt protecting them, and I understand that I've got a defensible farmhouse, a rifle, and a very stubborn dislike for bullies. He met her golden gaze without flinching. I might be just a farmer, but I'm a farmer who chooses to help. You can accept it or keep arguing, but either way you're not leaving this house until you can walk without collapsing. They will kill you. They can try. They will burn your farm. I'll rebuild. Why? The word came out almost as a roar, Serath's frustration boiling over. Why would you risk everything for strangers? For aliens? We are nothing to you. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, walked to his bookshelf, and pulled out a small frame. Inside was a picture. Him, younger and smiling, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and graying hair. Between them was a boy, maybe 12, grinning at the camera. This is my wife, Sarah, and my son, Marcus. He held the frame so Serath could see. 8 years ago, we came to Eridis Prime as part of the third wave of colonists. The coalition was offering land grants to anyone willing to work frontier worlds. It was hard, but we made it work. We were happy. He paused, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. Then Sarah got sick. Something native to this world. A virus the med scans didn't catch until it was too late. Marcus and I got her to the clinic in New Coventry, but they didn't have the equipment to treat it. Said we'd need to get her off-world, to a real hospital. The nearest hospital was 6 days away by transport, Thomas continued, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. We didn't have 6 days. I tried to charter a fast ship, but no one would take the job. Too expensive, they said. Too risky. Not worth it for one dying colonist. He set the picture back on the shelf. Sarah died on day 4. Marcus watched it happen. Watched me try everything and fail. Serath said nothing. A year later, Marcus signed up for a coalition military contract, told me he wanted to make enough credits to buy his own ship someday, so he could help people who needed it. People like his mother. Thomas's jaw tightened. He died in a border skirmish near the Krell frontier, 19 years old. They sent me a medal and a form letter, thanking me for his service. The room was silent, except for the quiet breathing of the sleeping child and the faint hum of the house's life support systems. So when you ask me why, Thomas said, it's because I couldn't save my wife, I couldn't save my son, but I can help you, I can help Liss. And maybe that doesn't balance the scales, but it's something. It's what I can do right now, in this moment, and I'll be damned if I don't do it. Serath stared at him for a long time. Then slowly she bowed her head, a gesture of respect Thomas had seen draconians give to their superiors in coalition news footage. I am sorry for your losses, she said quietly, and I am grateful, more than I can express. Save the gratitude for when we all survive this, Thomas said, but his voice was gentler. Now, you need to rest. That healing factor won't kick in if you're using all your energy to stay conscious. I should keep watch, in case. I'll keep watch. I've got security sensors around the property. Anything bigger than a rabbit comes within half a mile, I'll know about it. He pulled out his handheld and showed her the monitoring screen. See? I might be a simple farmer, but I'm not stupid. You sleep, heal. I'll wake you if there's trouble. Serath hesitated, then nodded. Human Thomas Brennan, you are either the bravest fool I have ever met or the kindest. I have not decided which. Can't I be both? That, Serath said, her eyes already closing, would be very human of you. Within minutes, she was asleep. Her breathing deepened, and the tension bled from her massive frame. Even unconscious, she kept one arm stretched toward Liz, as if ready to protect the child at a moment's notice. Thomas sat in his chair and pulled up the security feed. The perimeter was clear. The dead hunters still lay where they'd fallen. He'd need to deal with that, but not yet. For now, everything was quiet. He looked at the draconian warrior sprawled across his living room floor, at the Varossi child sleeping in his chair, at his small farmhouse that suddenly felt very full. Somewhere above, in the vast expanse of space, ships were probably already plotting courses to Eridis Prime. Hunters were coming, maybe worse than hunters. Thomas checked his rifle's charge and settled in to wait. The smart thing would have been to never open that door. But Thomas Brennan had stopped doing the smart thing the moment he'd seen fear in a child's eyes and heard desperation in their voice, and he'd be damned if he let them down now. Outside, the twin suns climbed toward noon, and the wheat fields swayed in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, trouble was coming. But for now, in this moment, a farmer stood guard over two strangers who had become his responsibility, and that would have to be enough. Thomas woke to the sound of his perimeter alarm 3 hours before dawn. He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, his body moving on instinct honed from years of dealing with predators that came for his livestock in the night. The alarm was a low pulse, not the shrieking wail that meant immediate breach. Something had crossed the half-mile perimeter, but hadn't yet reached the inner defense grid. Serath was already awake, her golden eyes gleaming in the darkness. She'd risen to a crouch despite her injuries, her good wing half spread, her claws extended. In the dim emergency lighting, she looked like something from humanity's oldest nightmares, a dragon in the dark, ready to burn the world. "How many?" she whispered. Thomas checked his handheld. 4 signatures, coming from the north, moving slow and spread out, professional. He pulled up the thermal overlay. "Looks like 3 humanoid, 1 quadruped, big one." "Krell Hunter Tracker," Serath said. "They are using it to follow our scent trail. We left blood in the rocks, they will follow it here. How long do we have?" "At their pace, 20 minutes, maybe less." She tried to stand fully and swayed. The meat and rest had helped, but she was still badly injured. "I can fight, not at full strength, but—" "You can barely stand," Thomas said flatly. He moved to Liz, who had woken and was staring at them with wide, frightened eyes. "Liz, I need you to go to the basement. There's a storage room at the bottom of the stairs. Lock yourself in. Don't come out unless Serath or I come get you, understand?" The child nodded silently and ran for the basement stairs. Thomas turned back to Serath. "Can you use a rifle?" "I'm trained in most Coalition and Empire weaponry." He pulled out his spare hunting rifle, a powerful but simple projectile weapon, and handed it to her. "You've got 50 rounds. After that, you're on claws and teeth." He moved to his weapons locker and pulled out what Marcus had called his paranoid farmer collection, 2 more rifles, a scattergun, and a bandolier of plasma charges that probably violated at least a dozen weapons regulations. "I've got the north approach, you take east. If they split up, we've got angles on both." "You have done this before," Serath observed. "I've defended this farm from plenty of things that wanted to kill me," Thomas said, checking his primary rifle's charge. "First time it's been people, but the principle's the same. You protect what's yours." "We are not yours." Thomas met her eyes in the darkness. "You are now." Something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or just the recognition of shared desperation. Then Serath nodded and moved to the eastern window, her injured wing folded tight against her body. Thomas took up position at the north-facing reinforced viewport. His farmhouse wasn't a fortress, but he'd built it with frontier practicality, reinforced walls, sealed viewports, a backup generator, and firing ports that could be opened without compromising the structure's integrity. He'd never thought he'd need them against anything more dangerous than the local wildlife. He was about to find out if he was wrong. The thermal signatures were closer now, 15 minutes out. He could make out more details. The 3 humanoids were carrying heavy weapons, moving with military precision. The quadruped was massive, its heat signature bright and aggressive. Definitely a Krell tracker. Thomas activated his external speakers. "This is private property, you're trespassing. Turn around now and we won't have a problem." The signatures didn't slow. One of them, the lead humanoid, raised what looked like a communications device. A voice crackled through Thomas's external sensors, cold and professional. "Thomas Brennan, registered owner of land parcel 473. You are harboring a wanted fugitive and a high-value target. Surrender them both, and you will be compensated for your cooperation. Resist and you will be classified as an enemy combatant. Harboring, Thomas called back. I've got guests. Last I checked, hospitality wasn't a crime. The draconian is wanted by the Draconith Empire for desertion and treason. The Varossi child is subject to a bounty of 5 million coalition credits, dead or alive. You have 30 seconds to open your doors, or we will open them for you. Thomas looked at Serath. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. 5 million, he said. That's a lot of credits. It is. Could set a man up for life. New farm on a core world, real medical facilities. Never have to worry about being alone out here again. It could. Thomas turned back to the viewport and chambered around. 30 seconds is up. My answer is no. The reply came immediately. Then you have chosen death. May your ancestors forgive your stupidity. Ancestors already think I'm an idiot, Thomas muttered. What's one more reason? The attack came fast. The Krell tracker charged first, a living battering ram of chitin and muscle that hit his reinforced door with enough force to crack the frame. The door held, but barely. Thomas fired through the firing port, 3 quick shots that punched into the creature's armored head. It screamed, a sound like tearing metal, and fell back injured but not dead. Then the hunters opened fire. Energy weapons lit up the night, coherent beams that scorched the walls and shattered one of the viewports. Thomas ducked behind cover as superheated air hissed over his head. He returned fireblind, laying down suppressive shots to keep them from advancing. From the eastern side, he heard Serath's rifle crack once, twice, 3 times. A scream cut through the night, high and very human. 1 down, Serath reported. 2 to go, plus the tracker, Thomas said. He risked a glance through the firing port and saw the remaining hunters had taken cover behind his old tractor. Smart. It was solid metal. Good protection. Can you get an angle on them? Negative. They are using your equipment as cover. That's my favorite tractor, Thomas growled. He grabbed one of the plasma charges, primed it, and threw it through the broken viewport. The charge arced through the air, glowing blue-white, and landed behind the tractor. The explosion turned night into day for half a second. The tractor became shrapnel. One hunter was thrown clear, his armor smoking. The other managed to dive away, but Thomas was already tracking him. He fired twice, center mass the way Marcus had taught him years ago, and the hunter went down. The Krell tracker charged again, recovered from its wounds and enraged. It hit the door hard enough to tear it partially off its hinges. Thomas dropped his rifle and grabbed the scattergun, firing point blank into the creature's open mouth. The tracker's head exploded in a shower of chitin and ichor. Its body collapsed halfway through the doorway, twitching. Silence fell like a hammer. Thomas stood there, breathing hard, his ears ringing from the gunfire. His hands were steady, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. He'd never killed another sentient being before. Predators, yes. Animals threatening his livelihood, certainly. But people. Thomas! Serath's voice cut through his shock. One escaped, running north, fast. He shook himself. Can you track them? With my wing like this? No, they will reach their ship and... Serath stopped, her eyes widening. They will call for reinforcements. Thomas swore. How long? Hours. Maybe less if they have a fast response team in system. He looked at the carnage around his farm. The dead hunters, the destroyed tractor, the damaged door, the scorch marks on his walls. Everything he'd built over the past 8 years, violated in a single night. We can't stay here, he said. Where would we go? You said the nearest settlement is 300 miles. I cannot travel that far, not yet. Thomas thought fast. Not the settlement. Too obvious. He pulled up a map on his handheld, tracing the terrain. There, the Broken Spine Canyon, 20 miles northeast. It's a maze of caves and ravines. I used to hunt there before Sarah got sick. If we can make it there, we can lose them in the terrain. And then? Then we survive long enough for you to heal. He looked at her. Can you travel 20 miles? Serath's jaw set. I am Draconith. I have marched through worse with severed limbs and burned wings. I can manage 20 miles. That's not what I asked. She met his gaze. Yes, I can travel, but slowly. Slow is fine. We just need to move before they come back with friends. Thomas moved to the basement stairs. Liz, it's safe. Come up. We need to pack. The child emerged cautiously, their lavender skin pale with fear. I heard fighting. I felt people die. Their voice was small. Their fear, their pain, it was so loud. Thomas felt his heart break a little. He knelt down to the child's level. I'm sorry you had to feel that, but we're okay. All 3 of us. And we're going to stay okay. But we need to leave. Can you be brave for a little longer? Liz nodded and hugged him suddenly, their small arms wrapping around his neck. Thomas froze for a moment, then hugged back, careful of the child's fragile frame. "You saved us," Liz whispered. "You could have given us to them, but you saved us." "Yeah, well," Thomas said, his voice rough. "I'm stubborn like that." He released Liz and moved quickly through the house, grabbing essentials: food, water, medical supplies, ammunition, tools, blankets. Everything fit into 2 large packs and the hovercart. It wasn't much, but it would keep them alive. Serath had moved to the broken door, standing guard despite her injuries. "Thomas, the bodies. Should we—" "Leave them," Thomas said. "We don't have time, and I'm not in the business of hiding evidence." He sealed the packs. "Let whoever comes next see what happens when you threaten people under my protection." "You do realize," Serath said slowly, "that you have just declared war on everyone hunting us. The bounty on Liz will extend to you now. 5 million credits for the child, probably another million for me. Hand whatever price they put on a human farmer who killed 4 of their hunters." Thomas shouldered his pack and picked up his rifle. "Then they'd better bring more than 4 next time." Serath stared at him. Then, impossibly, she laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that shook her whole frame and made her wince from the pain of her injuries. "You are insane." "I've been called worse." Thomas helped Liz onto the hovercart, surrounding the child with blankets. "Let's move. We've got 20 miles to cover before dawn." They left through the back door, moving into the pre-dawn darkness. Thomas took point, with Serath limping behind him and the hovercart floating between them. The wheat fields stretched out in all directions, swaying in the wind, innocent and peaceful. Thomas didn't look back at his farm. If he looked back, he might think about what he was leaving. 8 years of work, of memories, of building a life after losing everything. He might think about Sarah's garden that he still couldn't bring himself to tear up. He might think about Marcus's room that he'd kept exactly as it was the day his son left. If he looked back, he might lose his nerve, so he kept walking, his rifle ready, his senses alert for any sign of pursuit. Beside him, Serath matched his pace despite her limp, her head held high, her pride refusing to show weakness. On the hovercart, Liz watched them both with those liquid silver-flecked eyes, seeing more than a child should have to see. They were maybe a mile from the farm when Serath spoke. "Why? We've been over this." "No, I mean, why risk everything? You could have hidden in your basement, let us fight them alone, claimed ignorance later. Instead, you declared yourself our ally. You killed for us. You abandoned your home for us." She paused. "I need to understand. Is this guilt over your family? Some human need for redemption?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, listening to the night sounds, the wind, the distant cry of a nocturnal predator, the soft hum of the hovercart. "When Sarah was dying," he finally said, "she made me promise something. She said, 'Don't let losing me make you stop living. Don't let it make you stop caring.' I told her I wouldn't. And then Marcus died, and I broke that promise. I stopped living. I came out here to my farm and I worked and I survived, but I didn't live. I didn't care about anything except getting through each day." He looked at Liz, then at Serath. "Then you two showed up, and for the first time in 2 years, I had a reason to care, a reason to fight, a reason to be more than just a man waiting to die." He smiled faintly. "So yeah, maybe this is about redemption, or maybe it's just about keeping a promise to my wife. Either way, I'm in this now, all the way." Serath was quiet for several steps. Then, "Your Sarah was wise. She was the best of us," Thomas agreed, "and she would be proud of you now." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I hope so." They walked on through the darkness, 3 souls fleeing into the unknown, bound together by desperation and an unexpected compassion. Behind them, Thomas's farm stood silent and damaged, a testament to the price of doing the right thing. Ahead of them, the broken spine canyon waited, a maze of stone and shadow where they might find sanctuary or trap themselves. But Thomas Brennan, farmer and fool, stubborn guardian of strangers, didn't let himself think about that. He just kept walking, his rifle ready and his heart open, leading them all toward whatever came next. And somewhere above, in the vast darkness of space, ships were already changing course, bounties were being updated, and hunters were preparing for the chase. The price of compassion was high, but Thomas had already decided it was worth paying. The Broken Spine Canyon earned its name honestly. From above, the network of ravines and rock formations looked like a shattered vertebral column stretching for miles across the northern wastes of Erides Prime. Thomas had hunted its edges years ago, tracking the wild hexapods that nested in the deeper caves, but he'd never ventured far into its heart. Now, as the triple moons rose behind them and cast long shadows across the broken landscape, he was leading Serath and Lys directly into its maze. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow opening between two towering stone columns. "That leads to a cave system I mapped 3 years ago, deep enough to hide us, defendable with multiple exits if we need them." Serath studied the entrance with a warrior's eye. "Defensible also means limited escape routes if we are cornered." "We're not getting cornered." Thomas guided the hovercart through the opening, wincing as its field scraped against the stone walls. "We're getting hidden. There's a difference." They moved into darkness, Thomas activating his handlight to illuminate the passage. The walls were close, carved by ancient water into smooth channels that twisted and turned like intestines. The air grew cooler, carrying the mineral smell of deep stone and the distant sound of dripping water. Lys had been silent for most of the journey, exhausted and overwhelmed. Now the child stirred on the hovercart. "I feel sadness here, old sadness, like tears in the stone." "Varossi empathy," Serath explained quietly to Thomas. "They sense emotional echoes. This place has known death." "Everything out here has known death," Thomas said. "It's a frontier world, but the dead don't hunt us. The living do." They went deeper, following the passages Thomas half remembered from his earlier explorations. Twice they had to backtrack when the hovercart couldn't fit through narrower sections. Once they heard something skitter away in the darkness, some native creature disturbed by their presence. Serath's hand went to the rifle, but Thomas shook his head. "Local wildlife. Nothing dangerous unless you corner it." Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, they emerged into a wider chamber. Thomas's light revealed a space perhaps 30 feet across and 20 high, with a ceiling lost in shadow. Water trickled down one wall into a small pool. Fresh water, he remembered, tested it himself years ago. Multiple passages led away into deeper darkness, but this chamber could serve as a central point. "This will do," Thomas said, setting down his pack. "We can defend it. We have water, and there's enough room for all of us." Serath moved to the pool, sniffing the water before drinking deeply. Then she collapsed against the chamber wall with a groan that sounded like grinding stone. Her wing dragged limply behind her, and Thomas could see fresh blood seeping through the synthetic skin on her arm. "The wounds reopened during the march," she said through gritted teeth. "I pushed too hard. Let me see." Thomas pulled out his medkit, significantly depleted now, and knelt beside her. The synthetic skin had torn away in places, and the coagulant foam was degrading. "I need to redo the seals. This is going to hurt." "I am aware." He worked quickly, cleaning the wounds as best he could with their limited water, applying fresh coagulant, and wrapping what remained of his synthetic skin over the worst areas. Serath didn't make a sound, but her claws gouged deep furrows in the stone floor. Lys watched from the hovercart, their expressions sorrowful. "I'm sorry," the child whispered. "This is my fault. If I wasn't—" "Stop," Serath said firmly. "You are not at fault. Those who hunt you are at fault. Those who want to use you as a weapon or a symbol are at fault. You are an innocent child who deserves to live in peace. But people keep getting hurt because of me, the people on the ship who tried to help us. Now, Thomas, you—" Lys's voice cracked. "Maybe if you just what?" Thomas asked gently. "Let them kill you, turn yourself over to people who see you as property? That's not a solution, Lys. That's surrender. But I'm just one person, one child. Is my life worth all this?" Thomas finished securing Serath's bandages and moved to sit beside the child. "Let me tell you something. When my son Marcus was about your age, he asked me a similar question. He'd gotten in trouble at school for defending another kid from bullies. The bullies were bigger, stronger, and there were 3 of them. Marcus got hurt pretty badly." He smiled at the memory. "When I asked him why he did it, he said, 'Because it was the right thing to do.' I told him that sometimes doing the right thing costs us. Sometimes it costs us a lot. And he looked at me with those serious eyes he had and said, 'Then the right thing must be pretty valuable if it costs so much.'" Lys stared at him. "What happened to the other kid? The one he defended?" "He became Marcus's best friend, joined the military with him, died beside him in that same border skirmish." Thomas's voice was steady despite the ache in his chest. "But in the years between he lived, he laughed, he loved. He had a life, because my son decided that life was worth the cost. Your son was brave, Liz said softly. My son was terrified, but he did it anyway. That's what bravery is, being scared and doing it anyway. Thomas met the child's silver-flecked eyes. You're worth fighting for, Liz. Not because you're an heir to some ancient dynasty, not because you're special or powerful or valuable to some faction's political games, but because you're a child who deserves to live. That's reason enough. Tears spilled down Liz's lavender cheeks. The child threw their arms around Thomas again, sobbing into his shoulder. He held them, one hand gently patting their back, and felt something in his chest crack open, something that had been locked away since Marcus died. Serath watched them, her golden eyes soft. You would have made an excellent father, Thomas Brennan. I was a father, Thomas said quietly. I'm just trying to remember how. They settled in for what remained of the night. Thomas distributed food, protein bars and dried rations, not much but enough, and set up a simple watch rotation. Serath needed to sleep, to heal. He would take first watch, then wake her for the second shift once she'd had a few hours of rest. Liz curled up on the hovercart, wrapped in blankets, and fell asleep almost immediately. The child's breathing deepened, and those strange swirling patterns on their skin seemed to pulse softly in the dim light of Thomas's hand lamp. Serath ate another protein bar, her fifth, and watched the child sleep. I have been Liz's guardian for 2 years, she said quietly. Since the ship that carried us from the core worlds was attacked, we crashed here, damaged but alive. I thought this world would be remote enough, insignificant enough, that we could hide until Liz came of age. What happened to the others on the ship? Dead, all of them. The hunters wanted no witnesses. Serath's claws flexed. I salvaged what I could, and brought Liz to the wastes. We have been moving constantly, never staying anywhere longer than a few days, and always the hunters found us. I do not know how. I destroyed our ship's beacon. I have been so careful. Thomas frowned. Could they be tracking Liz directly? Some kind of biological marker? Varossi cannot be tracked biologically. Their empathic abilities make them effectively invisible to most scanning technology. Too much psychic noise. Serath paused. Unless what? Unless someone close to Liz planted a tracker. Someone they trusted. Her expression darkened. Someone on that ship, before it was destroyed. But you said everyone on the ship died. I said the hunters killed everyone. I never said I saw all the bodies. Serath's voice dropped. What if someone survived? Someone working with the hunters? They could have planted something on Liz, something I would not have found because I did not know to look. Thomas considered this. Can you check? Now? Serath moved to Liz, carefully examining the sleeping child. She ran her claws gently over Liz's skin, feeling for anything unusual. Then she stopped, her eyes narrowing. She touched a spot behind Liz's left ear, where the skin was slightly discolored. There, she breathed. So small I missed it. A subcutaneous tracker, keyed to Varossi physiology. Can you remove it? If I had proper surgical tools, yes. With what we have. She looked at Thomas's med kit. I would risk killing the child. The tracker is embedded near major blood vessels. Thomas swore softly. So they always know where we are. Within a certain range, yes. We would need to go off-world to truly lose them. And we have no ship. Serath sat back, frustration evident in every line of her massive frame. We are trapped. They will keep coming until we are dead or captured. Then we need to change the game, Thomas said. What do you mean? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. They're hunting us because we're running. What if we stop running? That is suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the last thing they'd expect. Thomas pulled up the map on his handheld. Think about it. They know where we are generally, but these caves are a maze. If they come for us here, they have to split up, move through narrow passages, fight on our terms. And if we can take out enough of them, they will simply send more. The bounty is too high. Not if we raise the cost. Thomas met her eyes. Every hunter who dies in these caves is a warning to the next one. Eventually, someone will decide 5 million credits isn't worth the risk. Serath shook her head. You do not understand how bounty hunting works. The higher the risk, the more elite hunters it attracts. We will not face common mercenaries next time. We will face specialists, assassins, warriors who make me look like a novice. Then we'll deal with them too. How? With your 2 rifles and my injured body? Thomas, I appreciate your courage, but courage alone will not save us. No, Thomas agreed, but courage plus strategy might. And we have something they don't expect. Which is? Them. Thomas pointed to Liz, then to Serath, then tapped his own chest. A child who can feel emotions. a warrior who knows how draconians think, and a farmer who knows this terrain. They're expecting us to run until we drop. Instead, we're going to make this canyon so expensive to attack that they'll have to negotiate. Negotiate, Sarath repeated flatly. You think bounty hunters will negotiate? I think whoever hired them might, if the alternative is losing enough hunters to make the bounty cost more than it's worth. And if they won't negotiate? Thomas shrugged. Then we fight. But at least we fight smart. Sarath studied him for a long moment. You are either brilliant or insane. My wife said the same thing when I proposed. Thomas allowed himself a small smile. She said yes anyway. Then your wife was also insane. Probably. But we had 12 good years together before the end. I'd take that trade again. Sarath was quiet, then nodded slowly. Very well. We make our stand here. But Thomas, if this fails, if they overwhelm us, you must promise me something. What? Promise me you will take Liz and run. Leave me behind. Get the child to safety. I'm not. Promise me, Sarath said fiercely. I am already dead in the eyes of my people. Deserter, traitor, whatever name they choose. But Liz is innocent. Liz is the future of an entire species. If I must die to give the child a chance, that is a death with meaning. Promise me. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to say they'd all make it or none of them would, but he saw the determination in those golden eyes and knew this was important. I promise, he said. If it comes to that, I'll get Liz out. Good. Sarath settled back against the wall. Now tell me about these caves. Every passage, every chamber, every advantage we have. If we are to make a stand, we will make it properly. They spent the next hour planning. Thomas drew maps from memory, marking passages too narrow for larger hunters, chambers that could be defended, places where the stone was unstable and could be collapsed. Sarath added tactical considerations, sightlines, ambush points, retreat routes. By the time Thomas woke Sarath for her watch shift, they had the beginnings of a plan. It was rough, full of risks, and depended on a dozen things going right, but it was something. Thomas settled down to sleep, his rifle within reach, and found himself looking at Liz. The child slept peacefully now, their face relaxed, the fear finally gone from their features. In sleep they looked so young, so fragile. Worth fighting for, he thought. Worth dying for if it comes to that. He closed his eyes and dreamed of Sarah, of Marcus, of all the people he'd loved and lost. And in his dreams, they smiled at him and told him he was doing the right thing. When he woke, it would be to prepare for war. But for now, in this moment, 3 fugitives rested in the darkness of stone, finding brief sanctuary in a galaxy that wanted them dead. And somewhere above, ships were landing on Erides Prime, disgorging hunters, who carried heavier weapons and darker intentions. The storm was coming, but Thomas Brennan, farmer and guardian, had decided he would not run from it. He would face it head-on, with a draconian warrior at his side and a child under his protection, and if the galaxy wanted them, the galaxy would have to go through him first. They came at midday, when the twin suns of Erides Prime were at their zenith and the canyon shadows were shortest. Thomas spotted them from his concealed position at the canyon's edge, 6 figures moving across the broken landscape with professional precision. These weren't the random mercenaries from before. These were specialists, evident in their coordinated movement and advanced equipment that gleamed even at a distance. He triggered the comm unit. Sarath. 6 contacts, moving in formation. Heavy armor, energy weapons, they're not trying to hide. Arrogance. Sarath's voice crackled back. She was positioned deeper in the cave system, guarding Liz, while simultaneously ready to ambush anyone who made it past Thomas's position. They believe numbers and equipment will be sufficient. Let's teach them why assumptions are dangerous. Thomas settled his rifle and watched them approach. Liz, how are you doing? I feel them. The child's voice came through, small and frightened. They're eager, excited, like they're hunting prey they know they'll catch. Good. Let them be confident. Thomas checked his ammunition count and the placement of his improvised traps. Tripwires connected to plasma charges, unstable rock formations rigged to collapse, narrow passages he'd seeded with proximity mines salvaged from his farm's predator defenses. Confidence makes people careless. The hunters reached the canyon entrance. Thomas could see them more clearly now through his scope. 2 draconians, scales dark as midnight, wings folded tight against their backs. 1 Krell, its insectoid form bristling with weapons. 2 species he didn't recognize, both heavily armored, and leading them a human. The human wore bounty hunter leathers under advanced tactical armor, her face visible beneath her helmet's visor. She looked professional, competent and utterly cold as she surveyed the canyon entrance. She raised her hand, and the group stopped. Her voice carried across the rocks, amplified by her suit's speakers. "Thomas Brennan, we know you're here. We have your tracker signal. The draconian deserter Serath, the Varossi child designated Lys. You're surrounded and outgunned." Thomas didn't respond. Let them wonder. "My name is Captain Vex. I represent the Consortium, a collective of interests with legitimate claim to the child. Surrender them peacefully, and you'll be compensated for your trouble. Resist, and you'll be classified as an accomplice to treason. Your choice." Still, Thomas said nothing. He watched Vex's expression harden. "Very well, tactical dispersion. Formation Delta. The human is likely armed but untrained. The draconian is wounded. This should be simple." She gestured, and her team spread out, preparing to enter the canyon from multiple angles. Thomas waited until they committed, until they were inside the narrow passages, separated by stone walls, their formation broken by terrain. Then he squeezed the trigger. The first draconian went down with a bullet through the gap in their neck armor, the one place draconians were vulnerable, where scales met flesh. The hunter dropped without a sound. Chaos erupted. "Sniper! Cover!" Vex's voice cracked through the canyon as energy weapons lit up the rocks around Thomas's position. He was already moving, abandoning his first firing position for the second one he'd prepared 30 yards away. The Krell hunter charged toward where Thomas had been, only to hit the tripwire he'd strung across the passage. The plasma charge detonated, and the Krell's scream was mercifully brief. "2 down," Thomas reported on the comm. "4 left. They're spreading out trying to flank." "I am ready," Serath replied. One of the unknown species, a reptilian creature with 4 arms, found the passage leading deeper into the cave system. It moved cautiously, weapon raised, scanning for threats. It never saw Serath drop from the ceiling behind it. The draconian warrior, injured and weakened as she was, still had claws like knives and the strength to drive them through advanced armor. The hunter died without firing a shot. Serath dragged the body into the shadows and took the creature's weapon, a heavy plasma rifle that hummed with power. 3 down, she reported. "They are becoming cautious now." Thomas could see it. The remaining 3 hunters had pulled back, regrouping at the canyon entrance. Vex was speaking rapidly into her comm unit, likely calling for backup. The second unknown species and the remaining draconian flanked her, their weapons trained on every shadow. "They'll siege us," Thomas said. "Wait for reinforcements." "Then we cannot let them wait." Serath's voice was grim. "I'm going to draw them deeper. When they commit, collapse passage 7. That'll cut off your retreat." "I know. Do it anyway." Before Thomas could argue, Serath fired the plasma rifle into the air, a brilliant blue-white beam that screamed across the canyon. The hunters' heads snapped toward the source, deeper in the cave system. "The draconian!" Vex shouted. "She's wounded and desperate. This is our chance. Move in." They charged into the canyon, abandoning caution in their eagerness. Thomas watched them disappear into the maze of stone, then scrambled down from his position. He had maybe 2 minutes before they reached Serath's location. He ran through passages he'd memorized, his breath burning in his lungs, until he reached passage 7. He could hear weapons fire echoing through the caves, the scream of plasma rifles, the crack of projectile weapons, Serath's roar of defiance. He placed his last plasma charge against the support column he'd identified yesterday, a pillar of stone that held up tons of rock. "Serath, fall back now!" He triggered the charge and ran. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. The pillar shattered, and the ceiling came down in an avalanche of stone and dust. Thomas was thrown forward by the blast wave, hitting the ground hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. When the dust cleared and his ears stopped ringing, he found himself in darkness, his hand light damaged. He fumbled for his backup light, clicking it on with shaking fingers. The passage behind him was completely blocked. Tons of rock where there had been open space. And on the other side of that barrier, 3 hunters were now trapped in a maze they didn't know in the dark, with an injured but very angry draconian warrior. Thomas staggered to his feet and limped back toward the central chamber where they'd left Lys. His ribs ached, probably cracked, and blood ran down his face from a gash on his forehead. But he was alive. "Serath, report," he said into the comm. Static. Then, "I am alive, trapped on the far side of your cave-in, but alive. The hunters are with me. I can hear them in the darkness. Can you take them? In an open fight?" "No, but these are not open spaces, and they cannot see in the dark as I can. I will hunt them as they tried to hunt us. Her voice held a grim satisfaction. They made a mistake coming into my territory. Don't take unnecessary risks. Thomas, I am Draconith. Risk is our nature. A pause. Check on Liz. Make sure the child is safe. Thomas limped faster, ignoring the pain in his ribs. When he reached the central chamber, he found Liz huddled in the corner, hands pressed over their ears, tears streaming down their lavender face. Liz! He knelt beside the child. Are you hurt? I feel them, Liz sobbed. The ones who died. Their fear, their pain, it's so loud. And the ones still alive, they're terrified now. I can feel their terror echoing through the stone. Thomas pulled the child into his arms, holding them tight. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you have to feel this. Why do they hate us so much? What did we do? You didn't do anything. They're not hunting you because of something you did. They're hunting you because of what you represent. Power, politics, credits. None of it is your fault. In the darkness beyond the chamber, Thomas heard a scream cut short. Then silence. Liz flinched. Sarath killed another one. She's protecting us. Protecting you. But she's hurt. I can feel her pain too. And yours. Your ribs are broken. Liz looked up at him with those two knowing eyes. Everyone gets hurt because of me. Everyone gets hurt because other people make bad choices. Thomas corrected gently. We're choosing to protect you. That's our choice, not your burden. Another scream echoed through the caves, closer this time. Thomas set Liz down carefully and picked up his rifle. Stay here, behind the rocks. Don't come out unless I call for you. Thomas, I'll be fine. I promise. He moved to the passage entrance, his rifle raised. His ribs screamed with every breath, and his vision kept blurring from the head wound. But his hands were steady on the weapon. A figure stumbled into the chamber. The second unknown species, its armor scorched and cracked. It saw Thomas and raised its weapon, but Thomas fired first. 3 shots, center mass. The hunter dropped. 4 down, Thomas said into the comm. 2 left. 1, Sarath's voice corrected. I have just finished with the second draconian. Captain Vex remains, and she is clever, using grenades to keep me at distance, forcing me into passages too narrow for my wings. Can you flank her? Not without leaving Vex a path deeper into the caves, toward you and Liz. Thomas understood. Sarath was the final barrier between them and the last hunter. If Sarath moved, Vex would slip past. But if Sarath stayed engaged, Vex would eventually wear her down with superior firepower. Stalemate. Let her through, Thomas said. What? Let her through. Lead her here. I'll be ready. Thomas, she is a professional killer with military-grade equipment. You are an injured farmer with a hunting rifle. I'm an injured farmer who's defended this position twice already, Thomas said. Trust me, lead her to me. Sarath was quiet for a moment. If you die, I will be very angry with you. I'll keep that in mind. Thomas positioned himself behind cover, his rifle trained on the passage entrance. He could hear them coming. Sarath's heavy footfalls, her labored breathing, the whine of energy weapons. Then they burst into the chamber. Sarath came first, her scales scorched, her wing dragging uselessly behind her, blood streaming from a dozen new wounds. She rolled to the side, and Vex followed, her plasma rifle tracking. Thomas fired. His first shot hit Vex's rifle, the bullet shorting out the weapon's power cell. It exploded in her hands, throwing her backward. His second shot hit her shoulder, punching through armor. His third missed as she dove for cover. Stay down! Vex shouted, pulling a pistol. I'm not done. Neither am I, Thomas replied. They exchanged fire across the chamber, energy bolts and bullets ricocheting off stone. Thomas's cover was better, but his ammunition was limited. Vex had superior firepower, but she was exposed. Then Liz did something unexpected. The child stood up from behind the rocks where Thomas had hidden them and walked into the open space between Thomas and Vex, arms outstretched. Stop! Liz's voice echoed through the chamber, and with it came something else. A wave of emotion so powerful it hit like a physical force. Thomas felt it. Sorrow, grief, compassion, and overwhelming empathy. Vex lowered her pistol, her eyes going wide. What is this? Pain, Liz said, tears streaming down their face. Your pain. You're hurting. You've been hurting for so long. Someone you loved died, and you blame yourself, and you think if you just keep fighting, keep hunting, keep being strong, maybe it will hurt less. Vex's hand shook. How do you get out of my head? I'm not in your head. I'm just feeling what you feel. And you feel so much. Liz took a step closer. You don't want to do this. You don't want to hurt anyone else. You're just afraid that if you stop, you'll have to face the pain. Liz, get back, Thomas shouted, but the child ignored him. I'm sorry someone hurt you, Liz said to Vex. I'm sorry you're in pain, but hurting us won't make your pain go away. It'll just add more pain to the galaxy. More grief, more death. Is that really what you want? Vex's pistol clattered to the ground. She sank to her knees, her face contorted with emotions she'd clearly been suppressing for years. My daughter, she whispered. The Krell took her, used her like they used your people, until there was nothing left. I hunt because it's all I have left, because if I stop, I'll have to admit she's really gone. Lys crossed the remaining distance and did something remarkable. The child hugged the woman who'd been trying to kill them. She's not gone, Lys said softly. She's in you, in your memories, in your love for her. That doesn't die even when people do. Vex broke down, sobbing into Lys's shoulder. This hardened killer reduced to a grieving mother by the compassion of a child she'd hunted for credits. Thomas lowered his rifle slowly, hardly believing what he was seeing. Sereth limped over to stand beside him, equally stunned. What just happened? Thomas asked. A Verossi child, Sereth said quietly, just reminded us all why their species was treasured. Not as weapons, but as healers. They stood there in the aftermath of battle, a broken farmer, a wounded warrior, a child who could feel the universe's pain, and a hunter who'd just rediscovered her humanity. And for a moment, the only sound was crying and the drip of water on ancient stone. Then Vex looked up at Lys, her face streaked with tears. What have I become? Someone who forgot who they were, Lys said gently. But you can remember. You can choose differently. Vex stared at the child, then at Thomas and Sereth. The consortium will send more hunters, better ones. They won't stop until they have the child, or until everyone protecting them is dead. Then we'll deal with them too, Thomas said. You don't understand. They have resources you can't imagine. Ships, armies, political influence that spans sectors. Vex stood, wiping her face. But there might be another way. What way? Sarath demanded, her claws still extended. I was hired by a broker. I never met the actual client, but I know who did. Vex looked at Lys. The person who wants you dead? They're not some faceless corporation. They're someone with a very specific reason to fear what you represent. Find them, confront them, and maybe you can end this without more bloodshed. You'll help us? Thomas asked skeptically. Vex looked at Lys again, at the child who'd seen her pain and offered comfort instead of judgment. I lost my daughter. I won't help anyone take another child from the galaxy. She picked up her fallen pistol and held it out to Thomas. Grip first. I'll help, if you'll trust me. Thomas looked at Serath, then at Lys. The child nodded, still feeling things the rest of them couldn't. She means it, Lys said. She's done killing. Thomas took the pistol. Then welcome to the strangest rescue operation in galactic history. Now, let's patch everyone up and figure out how to find whoever's behind this. As they tended their wounds and began to plan their next move, Thomas realized something. They were no longer just running. They were no longer just surviving. They were going on the offensive. And somewhere in the galaxy, someone very powerful was about to learn that compassion could be just as dangerous as any weapon, especially when backed by a stubborn farmer, a loyal warrior, an empathic child, and a reformed hunter. The hunted were about to become the hunters, and the galaxy would never be the same.